Thank you for joining this week's Washington Talk. I'm Ji Ha-ham. It's been 2 weeks since the South Korean government offered its audacious plan to North Korea. But with North Korea's immediate rejection and a growing controversy in South Korea, many people now doubt whether the new initiative can move forward. While the US and South Korea resumed the joint military exercise, 2 Russian bombers flew through South Korea's air defense zone. Today, we'll discuss these and more.
We believe it is incumbent on the DPRK to respond and to respond affirmatively to that, knowing that, believing that we can achieve progress towards what is a collective goal.
In the studio with me is Joseph Detrani. Ambassador Detrani served as special envoy for the six-party talks and as the director of National Counter-Proliferation Center. He spent over 2 decades with CIA as a member of the Senior Intelligence Service. David Maxwell is also with us today. Colonel Maxwell is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the Global Peace Foundation, where he focuses on a free and unified Korea. Colonel Maxwell was a war planner for the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command. Welcome to the show. Good to have you both today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
The State Department has shown its willingness to support President Yoon Suk-yeol's audacious initiative and asked North Korea to respond affirmatively. But North Korea's Kim Yo-jong rejected the plan, and even in South Korea, the initiative doesn't seem to have full support. Ambassador, we understand this is an audacious, ambitious, bold plan.
Right.
But without North Korea's positive reaction, we cannot really expect this to be an effective one. Should South Korea reconsider?
No, I think it's a very effective proposal. It's an initial proposal. It's a comprehensive economic proposal of significant economic deliverables, healthcare, food, agricultural assistance, foreign investment, ports and airports. This is a significant first step, and it's the beginning of a process. So despite the fact that Kim Yo-jong said it was not viable, I think it is viable, I think it's appropriate, and it's a very timely proposal. It's the beginning of a process.
Okay, Colonel Maxwell, not only North Korea, but people in South Korea also raised their voice against this initiative. I'm not talking about the opposition party, but the supporters of the Yoon government. What's the problem here?
Well, I think that, as Ambassador Detrani said, this is an initial proposal, and I think that's really the key word is initial. I think that people look at this at first glance, and they don't see it as audacious, but really a status quo plan. One that is economic incentives in return for steps toward denuclearization. An action-for-action type plan, which can work, it can be effective, but I think that the people in the South and the North do not fully grasp the depth and complexity of the plan, and I think that's probably because it is not fully fleshed out and has not been fully presented to the public. So I think we have to wait and see, but I think initially people look at this and, there's Korea fatigue. And I think people look at this as really status quo and nothing really that audacious yet.
Ambassador, the core of this initiative is to provide North Korea an economic package or benefits. But Kim Yo-jong said no one barters its destiny for corn cake. If she doesn't want cake, then should we maybe consider to create a situation where she desperately needs a corn cake?
Well, I think North Korea does need the economic assistance when we look at the food situation, when we look at the healthcare situation, when we look at the energy situation in North Korea, there's no question that there are economic issues that are imperative for the betterment of not only the government, but of the people, the 25 million people in North Korea. So yes, the economic element is an important element to the equation. But when Kim Yo-jong says we're not going to give up nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems for an economic package, I think we have to put that in perspective. It's understandable they would say something like that. She would say something like that because, in fact, they're looking for what? Security assurances? The lifting of sanctions? We know this from 30 years of negotiations with North Korea. So this is the beginning of a very important process, a roadmap. But this is the economic element of that roadmap, and now we have to flush out the security assurances, the other elements of lifting sanctions. But the core element here is denuclearization, complete verifiable denuclearization, and a process that lends itself to complete verifiable denuclearization.
Colonel Maxwell, the initiative would provide North Korea an economic benefit, as we just discussed, but wouldn't this endanger the existence of Kim regime?
Well, I think your question identifies the paradox that North Korea desperately needs economic reform. As the ambassador outlined, the people are suffering horrendously. However, the reason they're suffering is because of the deliberate decision-making by Kim Jong-un. And he has chosen to prioritize development of nuclear weapons, missiles, support to the elite, and development of advanced military capabilities to dominate the peninsula at the expense of the Korean people. And of course, if he does engage in economic development, that means opening, that means engagement, that means people-to-people contact, and that does put the regime at risk. And so we have this situation where Kim Jong-un is seeking survival of the regime at the expense of the people. But as the ambassador said, and as your question implies, they desperately need economic reform, but it is Kim Jong-un who has blocked it at every turn.
Even though North Korea denounced the audacious initiative, some are making suggestions to keep the plan alive. One of the suggestions is to consider the normalization of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and North Korea as part of the audacious initiative. Ambassador, we've heard this idea before, so how Washington should take this idea?
Well, I mean, I think normalization of relations with North Korea, I think from 30 years of negotiating with North Korea, despite the fact that they were failed negotiations, was the end. Once we got complete verifiable denuclearization, that would lend itself to the normalization of relations. That was the end of the process. However, in the interim, we could talk about liaison offices. We could talk about interest sections. This indeed was put on the table going back to 2000 with Secretary Albright and her visit to Pyongyang, talking about, and indeed we did this with China. We had created a liaison office in 1975 before we normalized in 1979. So yes, we can make moves towards a formal relationship, but the end of the process should be the normalization of relations, and that means complete verifiable denuclearization.
Is it really something that North Korea really accomplished?
I think North Korea does want that normalization of relations with the United States. It would give them international legitimacy. It would open them up to foreign direct investments. And I think we saw this with former President Donald Trump's meetings with Chairman Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Yes, I think this is what Kim Jong-un wants. He wants a normal relationship with the United States. However, he wants it on his terms, and that's being accepted as a nuclear weapons state.
Colonel Maxwell, I mean, of course, this is hypothetical, but can North Korea accept the situation where the two countries actively engage each other in trade, cultural exchanges, which would lead Pyongyang to expose its people to the world?
Yes, again, I think that's the problem for Kim Jong-un. He needs that engagement. The country needs that engagement, but exposing his people to the outside world is really a threat to him. Information and influence inside North Korea is an existential threat to the survival of the regime. However, that said, I fully agree with Ambassador Detrani. It would be really a great start to have liaison offices, to have engagement, to have cultural exchanges, have educational exchanges. I would welcome Koreans from the North to come to the United States and experience freedom. But of course, Kim Jong-un is not only reluctant to do that, he fears that. And so I don't think it's likely to happen. But we should make every effort to expose the people to the outside world, to the truth, and so that they know what the world is like and how they should be living.
Ambassador, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's excellent. I totally agree with Colonel Maxwell. Getting the North Korean people to visit not only the United States, but the Republic of Korea, the European Union, other countries and so forth, to get a sense of what's going on out there. I think that's so important, and they bring that information back. I think that would lend itself to, hopefully, a transformation that would happen internally in North Korea, where Kim Jong-un makes a decision to move towards getting information to the people of North Korea, opening things up for the North Korean people, permitting them to go out. So I totally agree with the Colonel that this would be a very meaningful move on the part of all countries, but indeed a meaningful move on the part of the Republic of Korea and the United States to address the North Korean issue.
Colonel Maxwell, not just this initiative, but prior government initiative were also rejected by North Korea. This means that nothing has worked. So are there still approaches that we can try?
Yes, I remember hearing from a longtime Korea watcher who did say that everything that could be tried with North Korea has been tried, and it can only be repackaged. But I'm encouraged by South Korea's appointment of Ambassador Lee Shin-hwa, the new human rights ambassador for South Korea, for North Korean human rights. And this week she talked about information and how important it is to get information. And I think that part of the audacious, bold plan should focus on three things: human rights, a human rights upfront approach, information into North Korea, and then the long-term focus on solving the Korea question. And the Korea question is outlined in the Armistice Agreement in paragraph 60, which is the unnatural division of the Korean Peninsula. Because as we've talked about, Kim Jong-un is not going to give up his nuclear weapons now. And the only way we're going to see an end to the nuclear program and the crimes against humanity being committed against the Korean people in the North is through the establishment of a free and unified Korea. And that's what should be the focus of the plan. People say denuclearization first, unification second. I think the focus really needs to be unification first, and then denuclearization will happen.
You may hesitate to say this, but wouldn't it be a regime change?
Well, what we do in this audacious plan is to give three options to Kim Jong-un. The option is to change his behavior and act as a responsible member of the international community. The second option is to be forced by his elite and the military to change his behavior. And then the third is to be forced to change by the Korean people living in the North, who will no longer tolerate the terrible situation, the repressive rule which they live under.
Ambassador Detrani, what is the position of the U.S. government on the idea of reunification, as Colonel Maxwell just said?
Well, I think the position of the United States government has been, and I believe it continues to be, it's the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I mean, 1945, we saw the end of the Second World War, and in 47, and a division at the 38th parallel. But that was temporary. That was temporary. The goal was to reunify the North and South, and that has been, and it should continue to be the goal, the ultimate goal.
The audacious initiative does not include any plan to address human rights issues. So do you agree with the claim that this is a major downside of this initiative?
No, as I said before, I think the audacious initiative of the Yoon administration, and President Yoon Suk-yeol said it very well, was the economic element of a proposal. And this is just one part of a roadmap. And again, it's action for actions. It's one part of an initiative that will address human rights issues, that will address certainly the complete verifiable denuclearization, that will address the security assurances that the North says they need and that they do need, and if you will, on the lifting of sanctions. It's all part of it. But we have to start somewhere. And this is the beginning of that somewhere. And we have to start with North Korea coming back to negotiations so this could be fully discussed. And right now, it's one side talking to the other and the other saying, we're not interested. Well, let's sit down. Let's put it all together. And I think the Yoon administration has taken the first volley, a very good one. But I might add this. They took this very significant initiative at a time when the Yoon administration is working with the United States on upgrading, enhancing deterrence. And we see this with the joint military exercises that are going on right now. So on the one hand, we're talking about an economic package of deliverables for the North, to include other things. But on the other hand, we're talking about deterrence and the need to work with our allies. This is the Iraq and the United States, and I might add Japan also in that equation, to ensure that there's viable, meaningful deterrence on the table. That's progress in my view.
Right. Colonel Maxwell, what do you think? I mean, should we worry that this human rights issue to be put aside?
No, human rights can't be put aside. Human rights is not only a moral imperative, it's a national security issue. Kim Jong-un denies the human rights of the Korean people in the North in order to remain in power. That's a fact. I'm encouraged by South Korea's appointment of Ambassador Lee for North Korean human rights. The Yoon government held the first human rights meeting in 2 years. And the unification minister just came out with a statement saying that human rights are important to South Korea and to the future of the Korean Peninsula. So I think we're seeing South Korea evolve a process that's human rights up front. And I think together with the United States, the ROK-US alliance must take a human rights up front approach. I'm confident that they will. And it is really necessary to address the human rights issues and not be dissuaded by those who would argue that we can't get some kind of agreement if we focus on human rights. We have to focus on human rights because it's the right thing to do.
So can I just second that? I like everything that Colonel Maxwell said. But the key here is it's a moral imperative, 25 million people. And that has to be part of the negotiations. And I'll go back to the six-party talks and so forth. When we talked about normalization of relations, we said human rights has to be on the table. Progress with the gulags and transparency into it. So absolutely right. And I think you cited that with the appointment of that Ambassador Li Xinhua and the work that's being done with the Unification Ministry. I think there's movement in that direction. So I think that's positive.
Meanwhile, the State Department stressed that the U.S. government views the trilateral cooperation between and among the U.S., ROK, Japan as pivotal to a number of shared interests in the Indo-Pacific region. But just one day after the U.S. and South Korea resumed the joint military exercise, 2 Russian bombers flew through South Korea's air defense identification zone. Colonel Maxwell, this isn't the first time we've seen the Chinese and Russian bombers crossing the air defense zone. Is this one area where the U.S. and South Korea can cooperate?
Yes, absolutely. This is, as President Yoon has said, that South Korea is going to step up on the global stage. It's going to be a global pivotal state. It's going to really expand on the ROK-US alliance. Militarily, I mean, today, South Korean, Japanese aircraft are in Australia, training with the Australians. Last week, Japan, South Korea, and the United States conducted an integrated missile defense exercise. So when Russians or the Chinese penetrate air defense zones, South Korean Air Force will take action. They'll coordinate with the U.S. Military, coordinate with the Japanese military, intelligence sharing through the JSOMIA. These are areas where the alliances of the U.S. can come together for the mutual defense. And remember, the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1953 calls on both countries to defend each other against threats in the Asia-Pacific region. Russia, the timing of this was probably to show its displeasure with the combined exercises that are being conducted, but the alliance needs to be ready to deal with such incursions if they actually penetrate actual airspace. So I think this is an area of mutual cooperation that is necessary and will take place and will result in the defense of South Korea.
Ambassador, what is the proper response of the United States to these military activities?
Well, I think, and I agree with the Colonel, I think what China and Russia are doing is totally inappropriate, illegal, and dangerous, I might add. You don't do these things. Now you may want to show your displeasure, as they did with the THAAD deployment, by using economic tools to show their unhappiness, but this is not the behavior of the proper behavior of China towards the Republic of Korea. So they should cease and desist immediately. And for Russia, I think, and I agree, I think Russia is showing that they're not happy with how the Republic of Korea has responded in supporting Ukraine in their efforts to thwart the invasion by the Russians and the war that's going on in Ukraine. But this is not what Russia should be doing. So for Russia and China, wrong. And there should be a very strong response, not only from the Republic of Korea, but from the United States, but the international community writ large. This cannot stand. This cannot be acceptable.
President Xi Jinping of China recently conveyed a message to South Korea that the two countries should eliminate interference.
Well, I think President Xi Jinping is concerned. Is concerned that the Yoon Suk-yeol administration has moved very close to the United States as close allies that we are, with the joint military exercises, with deterrence, etc. I think this is his way of saying, reconsider joining the Quad, reconsider having another deployment of the THAAD missile defense system. Don't be too close to the United States. This is wrong. The United States and the Republic of Korea, going back certainly to the Korean War, we are the closest allies on this earth. And this is China's way of saying and trying to put a little wedge between the United States and the Republic of Korea, saying, the Republic of Korea, remember, we're your major trading partner. Remember, we're neighbors in the same region. It's the wrong behavior on the part of the People's Republic of China. So, yeah, I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised that President Xi Jinping has put out this message of trying to caution the Yoon administration of getting too close to the United States and its allies.
Colonel Maxwell, South Korea maintains a good relationship with the United States, but at the same time, it is true that South Korea is going to be a neighbor of China in the next 1,000 years. What is the proper stance? What should be proper stance for South Korea in this reality?
Well, to build on what the ambassador has said, I think the first thing we've seen is the foreign minister, Park Jin, stand up to China in the three no's. China is quite hypocritical and calling for non-interference, yet it is interfering with the sovereignty of South Korea, telling South Korea no more THAAD deployments, no participation in integrated missile defense, and no trilateral alliance with the ROC, US, and Japan. And I think this is one thing that really threatens China, Russia, and North Korea, is the growing cooperation trilaterally. We've seen President Yoon make strong overtures to Japan, and I think we're going to see increased cooperation from a national security perspective among the three. And when you look at the three alliances, the power and strength of the ROC, US, and Japan, it really dwarfs China, Russia, and North Korea. And so I think much of the actions we see from China, Russia, and North Korea is really could be in fear of this trilateral cooperation. It is so important that China has told South Korea, the third no is no trilateral alliance. We should think about that. We should think about what that means. And hopefully, South Korea and Japan can overcome the friction of the historical issues, manage those issues while they put national security and national prosperity first.
A joint statement released by 79 countries, including the US and South Korea, once again urged North Korea to take concrete steps towards abandoning all nuclear weapons in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. But North Korea's Kim Yo-jong's answer to South Korea was, "Don't have an absurd dream." Ambassador Detrani, Colonel Maxwell, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.